I came home early and heard my wife talking with her mother in the living room. My wife said, "She's just a burden. I'm tired of pretending to love her." My mother-in-law replied, "Then send the girl away. He won't choose her over you." They were talking about my daughter. I stood there in silence, then quietly walked out the door. That night, I made a decision they never saw coming. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Griffin Hale drove home the same way he always did. Straight down Maple Avenue, left on Birchwood, then the long, quiet stretch of Redwood Street until his house came into view at the end of the block. The route had become automatic over the years, the kind of driving a man does when his body knows the road and his mind is already somewhere else. The neighborhood settled into its evening rhythm around him. A few kids on bikes doing lazy circles near the corner. A woman walking a small dog along the grass strip by the sidewalk, the dog pausing every few feet to investigate something invisible. The smell of someone's dinner drifting through a screen door, garlic, something roasting. The last hour of daylight turned the front lawns that particular warm gold that only happens in early fall when the sun comes in low and sideways, and everything it touches looks a little more patient than it actually is. Griffin pulled into the driveway just before sunset and cut the engine. He sat there for a moment, which was something he rarely did. He was not a man who spent time sitting when there was still work to be done. But lately the weight of a long shift stayed with him a little longer than it used to. Not in a way he could point to exactly. Just a settling weight that took an extra minute to let go of before he could walk through his own front door. He was 41 years old. Not old, but not young enough to pretend the years weren't adding up somewhere. He had thick, capable hands that knew the feel of loading docks and inventory manifests and a steering wheel at 6 in the morning. His hair was cut short and starting to go gray at the temples. His face was the kind that didn't show much. Not because he had nothing to feel, but because he had learned early that showing too much in the wrong moment cost you something you couldn't always get back. He worked for a regional distribution company out of Boise. Nothing that came with a title worth putting on a business card. 12-hour days more often than not. Rotating shifts, weekend calls when a shipment ran late or a truck broke down somewhere outside Twin Falls. The job had no polish to it, but it paid steady, and steady was what mattered when you had a daughter to raise and a mortgage on a house that cost more than it looked like it should. Mila was 8 years old. She had his dark eyes and her late mother's stubborn, slightly pointed chin, and she had a way of watching the world that made Griffin think she understood more than most adults gave her credit for. She had been with him full-time for 3 years now, since her mother Renata passed suddenly from a cardiac event that had caught everyone around them completely off guard. A healthy woman in her mid-30s. No warning. Just gone. Mila had been 5 then, and Griffin had done what fathers do when the ground falls away. He had steadied himself and held on to what was left. They had managed. Better than managed, actually. He had arranged his shifts around her school schedule and made sure there was always food in the house and always someone to walk her to the bus stop. He had learned how to braid hair after watching 3 videos and practicing on a doll she had outgrown. He had shown up to every parent-teacher night and every school event, and had sat in those small plastic chairs in school cafeterias with his knees nearly at his chin and listened to teachers tell him Mila was perceptive, attentive, curious. Then, about 14 months ago, he had met Trina Caldwell, who became Trina Hale after a short engagement that Griffin had felt maybe moved a little fast, but had told himself was the right thing. She was 35, worked part-time at a dental office, and had a laugh that was easy and a way of making a room feel lighter when she walked in. They had married in a small ceremony in the spring. Griffin had believed, with the specific optimism of a man who wants something to be true, that the 3 of them would build something real. He grabbed his jacket off the passenger seat and climbed out of the truck. The porch light was already on. Through the front window, the warm glow of the living room lamp cut through the darkening afternoon. He took the 3 porch steps in 2 strides and turned the handle. Inside, the house looked normal. Mila's backpack sat on the couch, half unzipped, a blue folder hanging halfway out. A bowl of cereal sat on the coffee table, still a little milk left in it, the cereal itself long since gone soft, probably from that morning. She had rushed through breakfast again. Griffin made a mental note to talk to her about that. Sit down, eat slowly, start the day right. He set his jacket over the back of a chair and was about to call out when he heard voices coming from the living room. He stopped. Trina's voice came through clearly, and beside it, another voice he recognized immediately. Heavier, more deliberate. Colleen Voss, Trina's mother, who visited often enough by this point that Griffin had long since stopped commenting on the frequency. The visits never felt entirely easy, but he had filed that discomfort under things that were probably normal about blended families and told himself it would smooth out with time. He did not move toward the room. He stood still in the hallway, the way a man does when something in the back of his mind says to wait before announcing himself. Trina's voice was unguarded in the way voices get when people believe they are completely alone in a house. She's not even my kid. I don't know why I have to deal with her every single day. Griffin's hand went flat against the wall. Colleen answered without a pause. Her voice had the quality of someone who had already thought this through and was now simply confirming what had already been decided. Because you married him. But don't worry. Once things are settled, you won't have to. The word settled moved through Griffin like cold water. He didn't react to it. Not yet. He just let it land and noted exactly where it landed. Trina made a short, frustrated sound. The kind people make when they have been carrying something irritating and are finally putting it down in front of someone safe. I'm telling you, I can't stand that girl. She's always watching me. Like I owe her something. Like I'm supposed to pretend to be her mother. A pause. The clink of something being set down on a hard surface. A mug, maybe. Colleen's voice dropped, but not all the way. Still audible. Deliberate in its quietness. The way powerful people speak when they want the words to feel like a private confidence, but also want to make sure they are clearly heard. Then stop pretending. Push her out slowly. He will choose you. Men always do. The words moved through the hallway and into Griffin and did not stop moving. Push her out slowly. He stood in the hallway of his own house and let those words settle into him completely. He did not move. He did not make a sound. He breathed in once, carefully, and then he stayed very still and listened. They were talking about Mila, not a stranger, not some abstract inconvenience. His daughter, 8 years old, the girl who left small drawings tucked under the wiper blade of his work truck. Crayon pictures of the two of them standing in front of the house, always with the sun in the corner of the page, always with a dog they didn't own, but she wanted. The girl who asked him every single night without fail to check under her bed before she could sleep, not because she was truly frightened anymore, but because it had become the small ritual of their evenings, the thing that said, "We're here, we're safe, all is well." The girl who had already lost her mother at 5 years old, and had spent 3 years rebuilding her understanding of what home meant. They were talking about a plan to push her out of it. Something in Griffin's chest did not break. It did not crack or splinter or give way in the dramatic fashion of a man receiving catastrophic news. It simply hardened, slowly, the way a material hardens when heat is applied and then withdrawn. It closed around something and would not be opened again. He stayed still a little longer, long enough to be absolutely sure of what he had heard and what it meant. Long enough to understand that this was not frustration vented carelessly between a mother and daughter. This was not a bad day talking. This was not something that would be walked back in an hour with an apology and a cup of tea. Colleen had said, "Once things are settled." That phrase did not belong in a venting conversation. It belonged in a plan. It implied a sequence, a timeline, a set of steps that had already been arranged, with an endpoint that had already been agreed upon. Push her out slowly. He will choose you. Griffin stood in that hallway and understood, in a specific clarifying way, that real understanding arrives, without drama, without softness, that the last 14 months had not been what he thought they were. Not entirely. That somewhere behind the easy laugh and the spring wedding and the shared dinners, a different arrangement had been forming. One he had not been consulted about. One he was not supposed to know about. One that involved his daughter disappearing from her own home. The voices moved into the kitchen. Chairs shifted. The conversation became quieter, domestic, finished with its important business. Griffin remained where he was until he was certain they had moved on. He turned around. He did not go into the living room. He did not raise his voice or slam a door or do any of the things that anger, in its first honest form, wants a man to do. He turned around and walked back to the front door and opened it quietly and stepped outside. The door closed behind him with a soft click. He walked down the porch steps and back to his truck. He opened the driver's door, got in, and sat down. He put both hands on the steering wheel. They were steady. That surprised him. He had expected something physical, some trembling, some clenching. But his hands were perfectly still on the wheel, resting there like they were waiting for a green light. His thoughts were not still at all. They moved quickly, pulling at things he had told himself were small. He was good at that, classifying things as small. Filing things under the category of probably fine, because the alternative category required energy he didn't always have after a long shift, and he had been trained by years of solo parenting to spend his energy efficiently and not waste it on things that might resolve themselves. Trina had refused to pack Mila's lunch 3 times in the past month. He had told himself she was tired, that the mornings were hard, that not everyone was a natural at the routine of it. He had packed it himself without making it a discussion. Trina left the room when Mila started telling a story at dinner. Not every time. Enough times that it was a pattern, but not enough that Griffin had felt justified in naming it as one. He had told himself she was distracted, working through something, needing space. Colleen had been whispering to Trina in corners during her visits with a specific kind of focus, leaning in close, eyes tracking Griffin whenever he moved through the room, stopping when he came near. He had told himself it was just the way mothers and daughters were. Private, separate in the way family units that existed before marriage always remained a little separate. Mila had asked him once, about 2 months ago, why Trina never sat next to her on the couch. He had told her that some people showed care differently, that it didn't mean anything bad. Mila had looked at him in the way she sometimes did, reading him carefully the way she always had, deciding how much of what he said she actually believed. He sat in his truck and stopped telling himself any of it was probably fine. He thought about the word settled with the same focus he brought to a problem at work. Colleen had used it in the specific future tense. Once things are settled, not, this would get easier. Not, she'll adjust. Settled implied a process already in motion. A legal process, very likely, given the way Colleen had spoken, the house, the support, the framing of a story. Colleen knew how these things worked. That much was clear from her tone. She had been specific in the way people are specific when they have consulted someone. Griffin took out his phone. He opened his notes app and typed the date at the top of a new entry. Then he wrote a single careful sentence. Heard Trina and Colleen discuss removing Mila from the home. Colleen said to push her out slowly. Trina agreed she could not tolerate Mila. Colleen referenced filing papers and claiming the house. He read it back once. Then he locked his phone and drove around the block. He drove slowly, without direction, for about 20 minutes, letting the evening air come through the window. He thought about what a man could lose if he reacted from anger right now. And he thought about what Mila would lose if he did nothing. When he came back and walked into the front door, he smiled at Trina and asked what was for dinner. He told her his shift had run a little long, which was why he was late. He kissed her on the cheek. He listened to her answer and nodded and went to wash his hands. He made sure his face showed nothing. That night, after the house was quiet and Mila was asleep and Trina had turned off her lamp and gone still beside him, Griffin lay on his back and stared at the ceiling. He thought about every choice available to him. He thought through each one with the same patient deliberateness he brought to inventory problems, to budget sheets, to everything in his life that needed to be solved rather than merely reacted to. By the time the bedroom clock read 2 in the morning, he had made his decision. He would not confront anyone. Not yet. Not until he had something real to stand on. Not until the picture was complete. He would act, carefully, quietly, and he would not stop until his daughter was safe. The next 2 weeks looked exactly the same from the outside. Griffin came home. Griffin greeted Trina. He ate dinner at the same table and asked how her day had been and took the trash out without being asked and watched the same evening news he always watched, sitting in the same chair with the same cup of coffee going cold on the side table beside him. He kept his routine so tight and so unchanged that nothing about him could be read as different. But everything had changed. He watched now, not with visible suspicion. He was careful about that. Suspicion changes the air in a room. It makes people careful, makes them cover tracks, makes the very evidence you need disappear before you can reach it. He watched the way a man watches a stretch of road for ice in winter. Steady, patient, eyes soft and wide, alert to the first small sign. He watched Trina's posture shift whenever Mila entered a room. The way her shoulders rose slightly, almost too small to see, but Griffin saw it now because he was looking. A bracing, involuntary and fast, like a person steadying themselves against something unpleasant. She answered Mila's questions in short, flat lines, barely turning her head. Not what anyone could call openly hostile. Nothing dramatic enough to photograph. Just absent. As if Mila were a distant sound she had made a policy of not responding to. He watched Colleen on her 3 visits during those 2 weeks. He noticed the way she positioned herself in whatever room Trina occupied. Always close, always with her back at an angle that excluded Mila from the natural sight line of the conversation. He noticed the speed with which she changed subject or lowered her voice whenever Griffin came within range. Not guilty fast, practiced fast, the way people behave when a habit has been running long enough to become automatic. And he watched Mila. That was the hardest part. watching his daughter quietly adjust herself to fit a space that was being made smaller around her. She had always been confident the way children are before the world gives them reasons not to be, walking into any room like she had a right to be in it because she did. Now her movements had changed. She paused before entering rooms. She checked first, visually, the way an animal checks before stepping into an open field. She kept her voice lower. She asked for less. She had stopped asking Trina anything directly. Griffin noticed this on day 3 of his watching. In the past, Mila had asked Trina questions the way kids ask adults questions, freely, without preamble, expecting an answer. Now she only asked Griffin. If Griffin wasn't immediately available, she waited. She didn't approach Trina. At dinner one evening, Mila reached across the table for the salt and accidentally knocked Trina's water glass, which rocked but didn't fall. Mila pulled her hand back and looked at Trina with an expression Griffin hadn't seen on his daughter's face before. Not mischief, not embarrassment. Something older. Something braced. Trina said nothing, just righted the glass and looked away. But the expression on Mila's face stayed with Griffin after dinner, after the dishes, after he had tucked her in and turned off her lamp and walked back down the hall. He went out to the garage and stayed there for a long time, turning a wrench over and over in his hand without any particular task in mind, just needing something physical to hold. A week after he started watching, he noticed Mila was eating less at dinner, not refusing food, not complaining, just taking smaller portions than she used to, pushing things around her plate a little. He mentioned it once, lightly, when she was doing homework at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening. "You doing okay? Feels like you haven't been as hungry lately." Mila shrugged without looking up from her worksheet. "I'm fine, Dad." He didn't push it. He filed it. 3 nights later, she came and found him in the garage, where he was reorganizing a shelf that didn't strictly need reorganizing. She stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment before she spoke. "Dad, is it okay if I stay in my room more?" He put down what he was holding and turned to face her fully. "Why would you ask that?" Mila looked at the garage floor. She moved her weight from one foot to the other. "Because it makes things easier." He crouched down to her level. "Easier for who?" She didn't answer that exactly. She just said, "I don't know. Just easier." Griffin looked at his daughter's face. She was trying to be helpful. She had identified something wrong in the atmosphere of her own home, and she was attempting to solve it the only way an 8-year-old can, by making herself smaller, less present, less of a possible friction point. She was 8 years old, and she had already learned to manage herself down to avoid a conflict she hadn't created. "You stay wherever you want," he told her. "This is your house. You don't ever have to hide in it." Mila looked up at him. She nodded, but the nod was the kind that says, "I heard you rather than I believe you." After she went back inside, Griffin stayed in the garage a long time. He was not thinking about the shelf. He began keeping a written record. Nothing elaborate. A small notebook, black cover, that he kept in the glove box of his truck where it was out of reach of the house. Every evening after dinner, when Trina went upstairs and Mila was in her room, he would go out to the truck under the pretense of grabbing something he'd left, and he would spend 3 or 4 minutes writing in the notebook. Dates, times, names, what happened, who was present. He wrote everything the same way, clean, factual, without emotion. The emotion was there. He was not made of stone, but the notebook was not the place for it. March 4th. Mila asked for a snack after school at approximately 4:15 in the afternoon. Trina told her the kitchen was closed and walked out of the room. March 7th. Came home at 8 in the evening. Mila had not eaten dinner. Trina had eaten, found a padlock on the lower kitchen cabinet where snacks were kept. Lock is new. March 9th. Colleen visited from 2 to 6. While Griffin was in the back of the house, Colleen told Mila directly, in the living room, that she did not belong here. Mila walked out of the room without responding. Did not tell Griffin until he asked that evening why she seemed quiet. The padlock on the snack cabinet occupied his thinking more than the other entries. It was a small thing on the surface. A cabinet with crackers and granola bars and those small boxes of raisins Mila liked. But a padlock meant a decision. It meant someone had thought about it, driven to a hardware store, purchased the lock, come home, and installed it. That was not a moment of irritation. That was not a bad day. That was policy. He photographed the lock with his phone the next morning before anyone else was awake. He photographed it again a week later when a second, heavier lock appeared on the cabinet above the refrigerator where the good cereal was kept. He also started paying closer attention to how Mila was doing at school. He called her teacher, Ms. Farrell, on a Tuesday afternoon during his lunch break, sitting in his truck in the warehouse parking lot with the window up. "Just checking in," he said. "How's she doing lately? Any changes you've noticed?" Ms. Farrell paused for just a beat longer than Griffin would have liked. She's been a little withdrawn, she said, careful with her words. She used to be one of the first ones to raise her hand. That stopped. She seemed a bit pulled back. I've been meaning to reach out. Actually, I was going to give it another week to see if it changed. Griffin thanked her and kept his voice even and asked her to keep an eye on things and call him directly if anything stood out. He sat in the parking lot for a few minutes after the call ended, his lunch uneaten on the seat beside him. Then, about 10 days into his observation, he came home early for the second time. His shift ended 2 hours ahead of schedule because a delivery had fallen through downstream, and the floor supervisor had sent half the crew home. Griffin drove back to Redwood Street and pulled up to the curb instead of the driveway when he saw Colleen's car already there. He walked up to the front door, which was sitting slightly open to the afternoon air, and heard voices before he reached the steps. He stopped at the base of the porch steps. Colleen's voice was precise and unhurried. The voice of someone walking through something they had already mapped. You need to move faster. If you file first, you control the framing. You get to tell the story before he does. His name is on the deed, but a judge isn't going to care about a deed when there's a documented pattern of instability in the home. Trina's response came quieter, a little less certain than Colleen's. But what about Mila? Colleen didn't hesitate. We say she's difficult, that she has behavioral problems, that you've tried to connect with her, and she's refused every attempt. That living with her has made the home environment unmanageable. Courts take that seriously when it's the mother filing. They will listen to you. Griffin won't just accept. Griffin doesn't need to accept anything, Colleen said, cutting her off cleanly. That's the entire point. You file. You frame the situation. By the time he understands what's happening, the process is already moving. You'll have a house. You'll have the support. And she will be his problem. A short silence. Trina's voice came back lower and flatter. And once she's gone, everything will be easier. Griffin stood at the base of those porch steps and felt something inside him settle into a shape that had no warmth in it at all. This was not venting between a frustrated wife and an enabling mother. This was a blueprint. Steps, sequence, language to use in a legal filing, strategy for framing an 8-year-old child as a problem, so that her removal from her own home could be presented as a reasonable outcome. They had not arrived at this in a single afternoon. This had been building for a while. Long enough that they had the language ready. Long enough that Colleen knew the word framing and used it the way people use words they have recently borrowed from a professional context. Griffin felt no anger standing there. That still surprised him. He had expected anger, the large, scalding kind. Instead, what he felt was the specific, cold clarity of a man who has just seen the complete picture for the first time and understands exactly what it contains and exactly what has to happen next. He stepped back from a door before either of them could hear him. He walked to his truck. He drove away. That evening, from the parking lot of a coffee shop 4 blocks from the house, he made 2 phone calls. The first was to Raymond Doss, a family law attorney in Boise who had been recommended by a coworker named Pete Okafor after Pete had gone through his own custody situation 2 years prior. Griffin had looked Doss up 3 days earlier, but had not called yet. He called now. Doss answered on the 3rd ring, and within 4 minutes Griffin had scheduled an appointment for the following Friday. The second call was to Mila's school, asking whether the counselor, Mr. Hargrove, could meet with Griffin at the end of the week. The school's secretary said she would pass the message along. Griffin sat in the parking lot for a while after the calls. He finished what was left of a cold coffee he had bought on the way. Then he drove back to Redwood Street, parked in the driveway, and walked inside with his jacket over his arm. He told Trina his shift had run long. She looked up from her phone and said that was fine. She went back to whatever she was reading. Griffin went to check on Mila, who was doing a puzzle on the floor of her room. He sat down beside her for 20 minutes and helped with the edges, which were always the right place to start. 2 nights later, after Trina had gone upstairs, Griffin went and sat beside Mila on her bed. She was trying to read. He could tell she wasn't really reading because she had been on the same page when he checked on her 30 minutes ago and the page hadn't turned. He sat on the edge of the mattress. She looked up. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Mila put the book face down on the blanket. "Sure." He kept his voice easy, light, the voice he used when he didn't want her to feel like the conversation had weight. "Has Trina ever hurt you?" Mila shook her head right away. Then she stopped. She looked at her hands, which were resting open in her lap, and she seemed to be sorting through something. "She doesn't hit me," she said. Griffin waited. "But she says things." "What kind of things?" he asked. Same easy tone. Nothing in his face that would make her feel like she was doing something dangerous by answering. Mila turned the edge of her pillowcase between 2 fingers, a small nervous habit she had carried since she was much younger, something that came out whenever she was trying to decide how honest to be. She looked at her hands. She says I'm the reason she can't be happy. She said it plainly. Not crying, not breaking. Just the way a child says a fact that has been carried around long enough to lose most of its visible weight. The kind of thing a kid says when they have processed it to the point of flatness, because that's the only way to keep holding it. Griffin kept his face neutral. He did not react with the large, visible kind of response that would have frightened her or made her feel like she had done something wrong by telling him. He simply nodded slowly, as if he were logging something ordinary. Has she said that more than once? He asked. Mila nodded. Okay, he said. He put his hand on her shoulder. You didn't do anything wrong. I want you to know that. You haven't done anything wrong, and you don't have to carry what she said. That's not yours to carry. Mila looked up at him. She searched his face for something, the thing kids look for when they need to know if the adult in front of them is going to stay steady or crumble. Whatever she found there seemed to be enough, because she gave a small nod and picked the book back up. Griffin sat with her for another few minutes. He said goodnight and turned off the lamp. In the hallway, he stood with his back to her closed door and his eyes closed. His jaw was tight. His hands were loose at his sides, but only because he was making a deliberate point of keeping them that way. What Mila had told him was not a legal document. It was not evidence in the formal sense. But it was the last piece of the picture, the piece that made the whole thing complete and clear and impossible to look away from. She says I'm the reason she can't be happy. An 8-year-old child had been told, more than once, that she was the reason an adult in her own home could not be happy. And she had carried that quietly, on her own, and adjusted her behavior around it, and had been waiting. Griffin understood this now, to find out if the one adult she fully trusted was going to notice. He had noticed. He thought about how long she had been carrying it. Not just the words themselves, but the entire weight of living in a house where the atmosphere was quietly hostile and no one ever named it. A child that age does not have language for that kind of thing. She just feels it. She adjusts around it. She wakes up every morning and navigates a space that has been slowly rearranged against her. And she does it without complaint because she does not want to make things harder for the one person she trusts completely. That was what broke through Griffin's careful calm more than anything else. Not the words Trina had said to Mila, or the plan Colleen had laid out, or the locks on the cabinets. What broke through was the image of his daughter watching all of it happen and choosing, quietly and on her own, to protect him from knowing. Because she thought knowing would hurt him. Because she loved him that much. He was not going to let that go on for one more day. He went downstairs, poured a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen sink for a long time. Then he went to bed. In the morning, he moved forward. 2 days later, Griffin did not go to work. He called in just after 5 in the morning and told his supervisor he had a personal matter. No details. His supervisor had known him for 6 years and understood that Griffin Hale did not take personal days for small reasons. He woke early, made coffee in the quiet kitchen, and sat at the table. He had the folder open in front of him, and he went through it once more. Not because he needed to, but because he wanted everything he was about to say to be exact and in order. He closed it when he was satisfied. Then he waited. At 7:30, he walked Mila to the bus stop the way he did every morning he was home. She was in a good mood. She had a spelling test that morning, and she had been practicing the words all week, and she was confident. She talked about it the whole way to the corner. Griffin listened and asked her to spell necessary and environment, and she got both right. He waited at the curb until the bus doors folded shut, and the bus turned the corner and disappeared. Then he walked back to the house. Inside, the kitchen was still quiet. The second pot of coffee had finished brewing. He poured a cup and sat back down at the table with the folder. Trina came downstairs at 8:15 in her bathrobe, moving through the morning the way she always did. Automatic, half present, not fully awake. She reached for a mug, turned, and stopped when she saw him sitting there. You didn't go to work. No, Griffin said. Sit down, Trina. Something moved through her expression. She pulled out a chair and sat. She wrapped both hands around her mug like it was a small object she needed to hold on to. What's going on? Griffin's voice was calm. Not cold, not raised. Just very, very steady, the way a road is steady just before it narrows. I heard you. Not just once. Twice. Trina's face went still. She opened her mouth, and Griffin could see her cycling through available responses. He could almost watch it happen. The quick internal search for the version of this that would allow her to recover the situation. Denial, confusion, reframing. But before she could settle on one, the front door opened. Colleen walked in without knocking, the way she always did. She came into the kitchen and stopped when she saw Griffin sitting across from Trina, with a folder on the table between them and a look on his face that told her immediately that this morning was not going the way any morning was supposed to go. For just a fraction of a second, something shifted in Colleen's expression. Surprise, or the recognition of surprise held in check. Then she straightened. She moved to the counter and crossed her arms and arranged herself in the posture of someone who has handled difficult conversations before. "What's all this about?" "Sit down," Griffin said. "I'll stand," she said. "Sit down, Colleen." The way he said it left no room. She pulled out a chair and sat. "I heard the conversation in the living room," Griffin said. He looked at Trina. "And I heard the conversation on the porch 2 weeks later. I know it was said both times. I know exactly what was planned." "You're misreading. Push her out slowly," Griffin said. The kitchen went quiet. Courts listened to the custodial parent. "File first. Claim the house. Blame the child." Trina put her mug down. Colleen's jaw tightened. Griffin reached beside his chair and lifted a manila folder. He set on the table between them. He did not open it. He just placed it there. "What is that?" Trina asked. 2 weeks of records," Griffin said. "Dates. Incidents. What was said? Who was present? The padlock cabinet. I have photographs of both locks. The dinner Mila didn't receive on the 7th while I was working late. Colleen telling Mila she didn't belong in this house on the 9th, in front of witnesses." He paused. "And a separate document from Mr. Hargrove, Mila's school counselor. He has been meeting with her twice a week for the past 10 days. Colleen's expression sharpened. "You went to the school without discussing it with Trina?" "I went to the school," Griffin said. "Mila's school. My daughter's school." "Yes." "You're blowing this completely out of proportion," Colleen said. Her voice had regained its footing now. Controlled, slightly dismissive, the voice she used when she wanted to make someone feel like they were overreacting. "This is a family adjusting to a new dynamic. These things take time. None of what you're describing is—" "Mr. Hargrove has documented emotional neglect," Griffin said. "Ms. Farrell, Mila's teacher, has documented 3 mornings in 2 weeks where Mila came to school without having eaten. On one of those mornings, Mila told her that food wasn't available at the house." He kept his voice flat and even. "That's in the file, too." Trina said nothing. The silence held for a moment. Then Trina straightened in her chair and Griffin could see her making a decision. The decision to fight rather than fold, at least for now. "You think this folder is enough?" she said. Her voice had climbed a register. "I'm your wife. I have rights in this house. Whatever you think you documented doesn't change that." Griffin looked at her. He nodded once. "You already filed," he said. The color left Trina's face so quickly and so completely that it looked, for a moment, like something physical had been removed from her. "How do you—" "I got the notice this morning from my attorney," Griffin said. "His name is Raymond Doss. He received the filing notification yesterday evening." Trina looked at her mother. Colleen looked back at her. Something moved between them that was fast and private and not entirely friendly. Trina turned back to Griffin. "You already have an attorney." "I've had one for a week and a half," he said. He leaned forward slightly, both forearms flat on the table. "You didn't just plan to push my daughter out of her home. You filed a legal document. And in that document, you listed Mila specifically. You said she presents behavioral and emotional problems that have made her difficult to parent. You named her Trina, an 8-year-old girl. You filed a legal claim against my 8-year-old daughter." Trina opened her mouth. "That is how these cases are framed," Colleen said quickly, jumping in. "Every family law attorney will tell you the same thing. You establish context. You establish the challenges of the household." "That's not no," Griffin said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "That's how people get caught." Colleen stopped. Griffin continued. "My attorney has already responded to the filing. His response includes the school's documentation. It includes statements from Ms. Farrell and Mr. Hargrove. It includes photographs of the cabinet locks with timestamps. And it includes statements from 2 neighbors who witnessed specific incidents on this property involving Colleen." He looked directly at Colleen when he said the next part. "One of them watched from across the street on the 9th when you told Mila to go find somewhere else to be. She wrote it down that same evening because it bothered her enough that she didn't want to forget it." A muscle in Colleen's jaw moved. "You built this case yourself," Griffin said. "I just collected it." He pushed back from the table and stood. He picked up his coffee cup. "Both of you should call your lawyers," he said. "Today. Because what happens next is going to move fast, and you need to be ready for it." He walked out of the kitchen. He heard Trina say something behind him, and then Colleen's voice, lower, clipped, managing the damage. He did not stop to listen. He had already heard everything he needed to hear. What happened next moved with a speed that neither Trina nor Colleen had prepared for. Trina's filing had done something she had not fully anticipated. by naming Mila specifically in the document, making concrete claims about the child behavior and emotional state as justification for her position. She had triggered a mandatory review process. Family court filings that involve specific claims about a minor's conduct or emotional well-being require verification. It was procedural, automatic. It did not require Griffin to request it. A child welfare referral was initiated within 48 hours. The caseworker assigned was a woman named Diane Pollard, who had been doing this work for 11 years and had seen most of the ways that adults behave badly around children in difficult situations. She was efficient and quiet and gave nothing away in her voice when she introduced herself to Griffin by phone. Pollard contacted Mila's school the same day she received the referral. She spoke with Mr. Hargrove, who had been documenting his observations of Mila for nearly 2 weeks by that point. Hargrove described a child presenting the clear, specific signs of emotional withdrawal in a home environment, decreased appetite, social retreat, loss of confidence in academic settings. He described specific things Mila had said during their sessions. Careful, measured things. The things kids say when they're not yet sure if telling the truth will make things better or worse. Pollard then spoke with Ms. Farrell, whose account was direct and detailed. Farrell had been watching Mila closely since Griffin's call. She had documented 3 separate days in the past 2 weeks when Mila had arrived at school without having eaten breakfast. On one of those days, she was specific about which day. Mila had told her quietly that food wasn't available at the house in the mornings. That detail landed in Pollard's intake report with substantial weight. The cabinet locks were still on the cabinets when Pollard visited the home 2 days later. Griffin was present. Trina was present. Colleen had been asked by Griffin's attorney not to be there, and Colleen had pushed back through her own newly retained counsel before ultimately complying. Pollard moved through the house professionally and without apparent judgment. She noted the locks. She photographed them. She wrote in her report that the cabinets containing food accessible to a minor had been secured with hardware locks and asked Trina to explain the purpose. Trina said the locks were to keep things organized. Pollard wrote that down too. 3 days later, Pollard interviewed Mila at school in a small room with a soft couch and a basket of colored pencils on the table. The kind of room designed to feel like not a room where official things happen. Griffin waited in the hallway outside. He sat in a plastic chair and looked at a bulletin board covered in construction paper art and thought about nothing in particular for 40 minutes. When Mila came out, she looked fine. She found him immediately and walked over to him, and he hugged her and told her she had done great. Mila shrugged. "I just told the truth," she said. "Was I supposed to say something different?" "No," Griffin said. "You said exactly the right thing." Neighbor statements came in over the following week through Griffin's attorney. Deirdre Patterson, who lived 2 houses down on the south side, had witnessed Colleen in the front yard on multiple occasions and had heard specific words said to Mila. She described one instance, the specific afternoon on the 9th, which she had gone home and told her husband about immediately, in clear, consistent detail. Her account matched Griffin's entry in the notebook to the hour. A retired teacher named Frank Obiora, who lived directly across the street and had decades of practice observing human behavior in contained environments, had been watching the household for months with the quiet concern of a man who notices things and keeps his observations to himself until he feels it is right to do otherwise. When Griffin's attorney reached out, Obiora produced 2 pages of typed notes from memory. His account was organized chronologically, written in the clear, measured style of a man accustomed to documentation. It covered a period of nearly 3 months. The picture that emerged from all of it was patient and cold and completely consistent across every source. Then Trina gave her first official statement and made her first mistake. She stated that she had never prevented Mila from accessing food in the home. The cabinet locks were in Pollard's photographs. They were also in Griffin's photographs, time-stamped, taken 3 weeks earlier. A statement that contradicts physical evidence is not a small thing in a legal proceeding. It is the kind of thing that requires explanation, and explanations in this context tend to require more explanation, and more explanation tend to require even more. That gap between what Trina had written and what every photograph in the file showed was the first visible crack in the structure she and Colleen had built. The first line made the second one necessary. The second made the third unavoidable. And each new statement Trina gave had to accommodate all the previous ones without contradicting them, which grew harder as the documented evidence expanded and the number of sources multiplied. Raymond Doss was not a dramatic man. He did not make speeches or bring emotion into conference rooms. He was a quiet, methodical attorney who arranged facts in sequences and let those sequences speak for themselves. In the second week of the formal proceedings, he laid out Trina's statement contradictions across a table in a single document. Each discrepancy paired with its corresponding piece of documented evidence, each one annotated with a source and a date. It was 4 pages long. He went through it without commentary. The court-appointed evaluator assigned to review the case was a woman named Dr. Elaine Morse, who had 20 years of experience in family court. She met with Trina twice. After the second meeting, she filed a formal note of concern regarding the consistency of the information she was receiving. That note was not a finding. It was not a charge. But in the context of a family court proceeding, it was a significant flag, and everyone who saw it understood what it meant. Colleen retained her own attorney in the third week of the investigation. That decision, made quietly and disclosed only when required, told Griffin and Doss something important. Colleen knew the situation had turned. You do not hire separate legal representation in a family matter where you have no direct standing unless you have begun to understand that your exposure has grown beyond the situation you planned for. For a while, Trina and Colleen maintained a coordinated version of events. The same language appeared in both accounts. The same framing. The same description of Mila's so-called behavioral difficulties. It was coordinated in a way that evaluators and experienced attorneys recognize immediately, because coordination leaves a specific kind of seam, places where independent accounts are too similar in phrasing to have arrived at their conclusions independently. The crack appeared in the fourth week. It was small, a matter of timing and attribution. Trina's account said that the decision to add security locks to the kitchen cabinets had been suggested by her mother. Colleen's account, given independently and in a separate session, stated that she had no involvement in decisions about the home's physical arrangements. She was a guest in the home, Colleen's attorney had stressed. A visitor, not a decision-maker. The two statements could not both be true. When Trina was presented with the discrepancy in a formal session, something in her face changed. She had been holding the weight of all of it. The coordinated story, the pressure of the investigation, the recognition that things had gone much further than she had expected when she signed her name to that initial filing. She had been holding all of it for weeks, and the weight of it had been growing, and at some point a weight reaches a limit that a person simply cannot manage anymore. She said her mother had planned most of it. The locks, the language in the filing, the framing of Mila as a behavioral problem. She said Colleen had told her what to write and how to say it, and had assured her that it would work. Colleen was in a room nearby. Later, in the hallway outside the session rooms, Colleen looked at Trina with an expression that had shed all of its management and its practice calm. It was the raw expression underneath. Fury, specifically the kind directed at someone who has failed to carry their share of something. "I told you exactly what to say," Colleen said. Her voice was low and brittle and exactly as controlled as it could be in a public hallway. "And you could not manage even that." Trina looked at her mother. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The formal charges were brought through Griffin's attorney first, before the criminal referral, as part of the court's own findings. Trina had filed multiple statements in a legal proceeding containing material misrepresentations. She had made specific false claims about a minor child in a custody context. She had done so as part of a documented, coordinated effort to manipulate the outcome of that proceeding to her financial and custodial benefit. Prosecutors reviewed the file. The criminal referral was processed. The charges were formal and specific, filing false statements in a legal proceeding and attempting to manipulate the outcome of a custody case through deliberate deception. Trina's attorney worked hard in the days that followed. Griffin was not involved in those negotiations. He had already said everything he needed to say. He had said it in a notebook in a glove box and in photographs taken before 6 in the morning and in a folder placed quietly on a kitchen table. He had said it through Ms. Farrell and Mr. Hargrove and Diane Pollard and Raymond Doss and Deirdre Patterson and Frank Obiora. He had said it carefully and completely and without anger, and what it added up to was something a court could read and understand and act upon. That was enough. Mila was at school on the morning they came. Griffin had made sure of it. He had driven her himself, which he did whenever his schedule allowed. She had been in a good mood, talking about a project her class was starting, something involving maps in different countries, and she wanted to do her report on Iceland because she had seen a picture of the Northern Lights in a library book and thought it was the most remarkable thing she had ever seen. He had told her that was an excellent choice. He had watched her climb out of the truck and hoist her backpack and walk toward the school entrance without looking back, the way kids do when they're at ease, when the world feels ordinary and safe and properly arranged. He had driven home. He was in the kitchen when the knock came. 2 county officials on the porch. Griffin had known the timing was close. Doss had told him to expect it within the week. He opened the door and stood to the side and let them in. Trina was in the hallway. She had heard the knock and come down the stairs and was standing at the bottom of them when the officials entered. She was wearing a gray cardigan and her hair was pulled back, and she looked at the 2 people standing in her hallway with an expression that was very close to relief. The specific relief of someone who has been carrying dread for so long that its arrival, when it finally comes, feels almost like a rest. The process was professional and brief. As they moved toward the porch, Trina paused. She turned and looked back at Griffin, who was standing in the doorway. The morning light came through behind him. His face was neutral, not cold, not satisfied, just still. "You ruined my life," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. He did not look away. He did not flinch. He just looked at her steadily and with complete clarity. "No," he said. "You did." She held his eyes for 1 breath. 2. Then she turned and walked with the officials to the car waiting at the curb. Griffin stood in the doorway and watched until the car turned off Redwood Street, and the sound of it faded completely. Then he went inside. He poured a glass of water and drank it standing at the kitchen sink, looking out at the backyard through the window above the faucet. Mila's bicycle was leaning against the fence where she'd left it after school yesterday, one handlebar slightly crooked the way it always got when she parked it in a hurry. He set the glass down. He thought about the word revenge, which people would use when they heard this story, because people tend to use that word when the person who caused harm eventually faces consequences for it. But what had happened was not revenge. Revenge was something you engineered specifically to cause pain. What had happened here was consequence, the natural, methodical result of choices that Trina had made freely, in full knowledge of what she was doing over a period of months. He had not caused her harm. She had caused her own harm, and he had simply refused to absorb it on her behalf. He had not gone looking for a fight. He had gone looking for the truth, documented it carefully, placed it in front of the right people, and let the weight of it do what truth does when it is properly presented. That was all. That was the whole of his strategy. Patience, accuracy, and the refusal to be the one who blinked first. The difference between revenge and consequence mattered to Griffin. It mattered quite a lot. Months passed. The house on Redwood Street changed in the way that houses change when the source of tension is removed, not overnight, and not in any single visible way, but gradually and unmistakably, the way a room stops feeling cold once a window you didn't know was open is finally closed. Griffin had the cabinet locks removed the morning after Trina left. He took them off himself with a screwdriver, standing in the kitchen in the early quiet before Mila woke up. He put them in a bag and dropped the bag in the trash at the end of the driveway, without ceremony. He repainted Mila's room on a Saturday in June. She had chosen the color herself from a strip of sample cards at the hardware store, a soft yellow-green she called seafoam, though it wasn't quite that. She had deliberated over the strip for nearly 20 minutes, holding it up against her arm, against the white of the store wall, asking Griffin's opinion and then overruling it, which was exactly the right way for an 8-year-old to make a color decision. They painted it together over 2 days. Mila handled the low parts with a roller. Griffin did the ceiling trim. After the paint dried, Mila put glow-in-the-dark star stickers on the ceiling. She had a system for it, a star chart she had drawn in her notebook that she was trying to approximate, placing each star individually with the focused precision of a person doing something genuinely important. She stood on the step stool, and Griffin stood nearby and handed her stickers when she reached back without looking. And they worked like that for an entire Saturday afternoon without needing to say very much. That night, when the lights went out, her ceiling glowed. She ate more. This was the first change Griffin noticed, and it moved him more than he expected. The portions came back. The second helpings. The cheerful grab across the table for another piece of bread. Small things that he hadn't realized how much he had been tracking until they came back, and he felt something unclench in his chest. She laughed more too. Small at first, tentative, like someone testing whether the ground beneath a joke was solid. Then with more confidence as the weeks went on. She got loud again. She argued with him about fair things and unfair things and things that were neither, in the way that kids argue when they feel safe enough to push. He welcomed every bit of it. In October, Ms. Farrell called him. She said she wanted him to know that Mila had started volunteering answers in class again, that she had raised her hand 3 times that week, that the girl who'd been pulling back for months was coming forward again, slowly but clearly. There was warmth in Ms. Farrell's voice that told Griffin she understood something of what the past several months had contained. He thanked her and meant it. Mila still had hard moments. There were mornings when she was quieter than usual, looking at her cereal with the distant expression of a kid working through something she hadn't found words for yet. There were questions that came carefully phrased with the particular care of someone who had learned that not all questions get good answers. "Is Colleen coming back?" she asked once at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. "No," Griffin said. "How do you know for sure?" "Because I made sure of it," he said. "That's my job." Mila looked at him across the table. Then she went back to her cereal, apparently satisfied. Mr. Hargrove continued to check in with her once a week. Griffin had asked him to keep the arrangement going through the end of the school year, and Hargrove had agreed. Griffin did not believe in pretending that something difficult hadn't happened. He believed in making sure there was real support on the other side of it. He made his own adjustments in those months. The long period of controlled silence, the watching, the documenting, the steady performance of normalcy while carrying everything he was carrying, had cost him something, even if it had been the only right approach. There were evenings, in the quiet after Mila went to bed, when the weight of all of it settled over him more heavily than he expected. Not regret, not second-guessing, just the particular fatigue of a man who held something very carefully for a very long time and is only now allowing himself to feel how heavy it was. He dealt with it in the way he dealt with most things. He took evening walks around the neighborhood after dinner, long slow loops around the blocks of Redwood Street while the sky went dark overhead. He called his older brother Devin in Meridian, and they talked for an hour about nothing in particular. Devin's truck, a fishing trip that had been planned and then postponed, a mutual cousin's new baby. Easy conversation, the kind that costs nothing and gives back more than it seems like it should. He started the garden. It had been something Mila mentioned once, casually, that she would like a garden, something they could grow together. He built a raised bed on the south side of the yard in a weekend, using lumber from the hardware store and a tutorial he watched twice to make sure he had the drainage right. Then he and Mila went to the garden center and walked the aisles together, and she chose tomatoes and a long row of sunflowers and a plant labeled butterfly bush, which she selected without hesitation because she liked the name and thought it was a complete commitment. They planted everything on a Saturday in late April, kneeling in the dirt in old clothes with trowels and a bag of fertilizer and a length of garden hose that kept kinking in the same two places. It was messy and took twice as long as Griffin had estimated and was one of the best afternoons he could remember in years. Mila kept a notebook for the garden, a small spiral one with a yellow cover where she drew each plant at different stages, labeling them in her careful, slightly uneven handwriting. The tomato sketch had a tiny sun in the corner. The butterfly bush sketch had a butterfly that had come out looking more like a flying lobster, which she had noticed and added a label to. Butterfly, kind of. Griffin looked at that drawing one evening when she had left the notebook on the kitchen table and felt something sit warm and solid in his chest. Not a single feeling, but several at once. The way certain moments stack feelings on top of each other in a way that doesn't resolve neatly into a word. He thought, not for the first time, that the thing he had done, the patient, careful, unglamorous work of it, had been right without any qualification. Not heroic, not dramatic, just right. He had done what needed to be done, and he had done it in a way that would hold up, and the result was a yellow green room with glow stars on the ceiling and a daughter who raised her hand in class again and a garden growing in the backyard. That was the whole of it. Not a dramatic story of a man burning things down. A quiet story of a man who paid attention, told the truth, and made sure his daughter had a home. That was enough. More than enough. On a quiet evening in early fall, Griffin and Mila sat on the porch together after dinner. The sky had gone that particular orange-pink that only lasts for 10 minutes before it fades out, the kind of color that makes everything it touches look briefly important. Crickets had started up somewhere in the yard. The neighborhood was still. A few houses down, someone's porch light blinked on. Mila leaned against his arm. He could feel the small warmth of her, the slight weight. "Is she coming back?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, not frightened, just asking, in the way that kids ask questions they already half know the answer to, but need to hear confirmed out loud. Griffin looked at the sky. "No," he said. Mila was quiet for a moment. The cricket sound rose and fell. "Good," she said. They sat there until the color was completely gone from the sky, and the dark came in from the east, and the porch light clicked on behind them, triggered automatically, the way it always did. Griffin looked out at the dark street. He thought about what he had not done. He had not shouted. He had not threatened. He had not fallen apart in his own hallway when he heard what was being planned for his daughter. He had not begged anyone to stop, had not argued in the kitchen at midnight, had not let the anger he was entitled to turn into the kind of action that gets used against you later. He had paid attention. He had written things down. He had made calls and kept appointments and answered questions with accuracy and let the truth do the work it does when it is held carefully and given the proper structure to move through. He had not forgiven. He would not. Some things did not call for forgiveness. They called for clear sight and steady hands and the willingness to protect what mattered, regardless of the cost to yourself. Forgiveness was for situations where the harm was done without malice or without plan. What had been done here had been planned in detail over months in his own living room and on his own front porch. It had included his daughter's name in a legal document designed to strip her of her home. That did not call for forgiveness. It called for exactly what it had received. Mila shifted beside him and pulled her knees up to her chest, leaning more of her weight against his side. He put his arm around her. She was warm. The yard was dark. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's dog gave a single bark and went quiet. It was an ordinary evening. Calm, unremarkable, and completely safe. For Griffin Hale, that was everything.